Farmers today are facing rising costs, volatile markets, and extreme weather. The A Better Way to Farm podcast digs into strategies to help you take control of farm inputs and maximize profit so your farm can thrive for generations. Remember to take advantage of our free resources at abetterwaytofarm.com. Now, from America's Heartland, here's your host.
Merry Christmas. Rod here at A Better Way to Farm, where we increase yields and improve profits. And I'm excited to be coming to you today. We're going to work on day 6 of the 12 days of nutrients, and we're going to be talking about magnesium. As we talk about magnesium today, it's in relationship to a lot of other things. All of the nutrients that we discuss are co-impacted by other nutrients, and they impact other nutrients. And so as we take this, I want everybody to really think about the fact that all of us need to dig and learn and study, because there is no one nutrient fix. If it was that simple, we'd all be growing 500 bushel corn. As a matter of fact, going after a one nutrient fix oftentimes creates an imbalance, creates a problem, and hurts us, and actually cuts down on the effectiveness of what we have and increases the need for other nutrients that we might be having. As we start in with magnesium here, and we'll do some wrap up at the end and try and put it all in perspective, but I want to share from the books, and as usual, as I go through, I continue to find new things that I haven't found before and new information. Working out of the fertilizer handbook, magnesium salts are more soluble than calcium salts and therefore may be more subject to leaching. Thus, the magnesium content in a given soil generally is lower. Because magnesium is part of the chlorophyll in leaves, deficiency symptoms of this element appear as a yellowing between the veins of older leaves. Deficiencies are generally most frequent on acid, coarse textured soils under high annual rainfall. Some magnesium deficiencies are reported on soils high in calcium or potassium due to the competitive effect of these elements on the plant uptake of magnesium. Grass tetany in livestock is a result from grazing forages low in magnesium. Here on this very farm that I'm setting on, we were not aware of this back in the 70s, and I can remember that we had cattle getting very sick because we turned out to grass too early in the year. And even though our soils have a high mag, our cows were getting very sick, nearly dying from a lack of magnesium. So we had to put out magnesium blocks. The most common source of magnesium is dolomitic limestone, which this book says can contain up to 12% magnesium. Some of the others are going to say up to 20, and that is true because we can get dolomitic here, what has that. Guys, there's a lot of reasons that we would be deficient in magnesium, but one of them, to me, the number one reason is not coarse textured soils that are acidic. Where we see it the most is where we either have really high calcium or really high potassium. And when we get especially that high potassium, we talk about the ratio between K and mag. And anytime we see potassium in parts per million above magnesium in parts per million, we tend to see that deficiency. And we're going to talk about what those signs look like and how you can fix that. But that's one of the things that we look at. To us, the two red flags are, is the magnesium base saturation less than 10? And secondly, do we have more parts per million potassium than we have magnesium? And then thirdly, we're going to look at how high is our calcium. Because here's the deal. Those cations, magnesium, calcium, and potassium, all compete for absorption sites. And if there's too much of one, the other two have a hard time getting in. We have particularly studied the K to mag ratio, knowing that too much K comes at the expense of not enough mag going into that plant, and thereby inducing a magnesium deficiency, which is a relatively easy and inexpensive thing to fix. Working out of the Western Fertilizer Handbook, they talk about the fact that calcium, magnesium, and sodium are usually considered in light of their effect on the physical conditions of a soil. And if a soil is extremely high in magnesium, we may find a calcium deficiency in those plants. Again, one at the expense of the other. And we get into some of these soils that have tremendously high magnesium, and that creates a need for some supplemental calcium in there, something to consider and think about. Of course, we like to look in this book because these guys are really good at sharing with us what are those symptoms. What does it look like when we're deficient in whatever element? Symptoms of a magnesium-starved plant. Number one, they lose their color at the tips and in between the veins, starting with the lower leaves and then proceeding upward, depending upon the degree of deficiency. Leaves can be abnormally thin. With an acute deficiency, the affected tissue may well dry up and die. The leaves of the plant are brittle and have a tendency to curve upward. They're curving upward because we're getting too dry. Guys, here's the deal. If you go out and you see, and we need to know these, I'm going to run through the yellows again. Yellow in the shape of a V in the old tissue, the old growth, the oldest leaves. In the shape of a V, that's nitrogen. Yellow, mostly in the top, just completely yellow leaves, probably sulfur. Yellow intervenal striping in the top, in the new growth, probably manganese. Yellow intervenal striping in the old growth, in other words, in the first leaves that came out, that's probably magnesium. And guys, the bottom line is, it's why we push the tissue test so much, because we know that once we see visual deficiencies of anything, we've lost significant yield, and we don't want to do that. And so one of the things we want to be looking for is this thing, and I encourage a tissue test. If you have some of the following criteria, way too much calcium, or mag levels that are less than your K levels in parts per million, or base saturation rate in magnesium that's less than even 12%, but definitely if it's less than 10, then I want to encourage you to tissue test very quickly in that plant's life, because you can foliar feed magnesium in there and knock that problem in the head before it costs you significant yield. Looking in the book From the Soil Up to see what we can grab here on deficiencies, and we turn to page 172, and it says, soil magnesium levels must be checked in making potassium recommendations. High potash applications on soils that are marginal in magnesium can cause a magnesium deficiency in the crop. Potassium to magnesium ratio is quite important. For a normal magnesium range of 12 to 15% base saturation, the potassium saturation should be about a third. In other words, if we have a 15% base saturation on magnesium, we'd like to see about a 5% base saturation on the potassium. Pure calcium carbonate contains up to 40% calcium, and pure magnesium carbonate contains about 28% magnesium. And so when we start looking at the different ways to put mag on or to avoid mag, those limes are the deciding factor there. So again, if we're short on mag, we want to use a dolomitic lime. That would be the high mag lime. If we're long on magnesium, then we want to be looking for that calcitic lime that has no magnesium in it and can continue just to take care of us. And guys, let me say this. It would appear, based on all of these books that I've read, that I'm not going to read out of it right now, but one of the things that keeps coming across over and over and over is the fact that when we're adjusting pH, and this is why pH is not the only reason to lime. We have to look at available calcium and base saturation rate of calcium, because we can get a false pH reading. I see guys who use dolomitic lime over and over and over, and they have these incredibly high magnesium levels. And remember this, magnesium affects pH more than calcium does. So most of the books that I read would say that it takes about 2 pounds of calcium to do the same thing as 1 pound of magnesium. And so if we have artificially high mag levels, that's sort of kind of a fake pH to me. What I'm saying is, put on calcitic lime, you'll probably drive some of that magnesium off. Your pH will not change, but you'll get that plant available calcium that you so desperately need, and you'll be able to get your potassium into the plant later or quicker. I mean, we'll get more of what we need into that plant by driving down those magnesiums. Having too much mag comes at the expense of calcium and potassium, and we don't want to lose sight of that. Looking out of hands-on, and Neil has a lot to say about the magnesium. He has studied and spent a lot of time working on this. A higher percent saturation of magnesium in the soil does not mean that the nutrient is more available. It is possible to get to the point where the percent of magnesium as it goes up actually makes the magnesium less available to the plant. Here is the optimum percentage base saturation of cations for most soils. Ideally, the cation of calcium should be at 60 to 70% saturation. In other words, 60% of the minerals that are attached to the soil colloid should be calcium. On a light sandy soil, That is on a light sandy soil. On a heavy clay soil, 70 would be optimum. So guys, somewhere in there, what we're looking for typically is between 65 and 75 as a base saturation rate on calcium. He says the correct number for magnesium should be between 10 and 20. We narrow that up a little bit. We're really looking more in that 12 to 18% base saturation range, but 10 to 20 is fine. But once we get down below 10% base saturation, we are looking for a heartache in the way of magnesium into that plant. We also know that when we get above 20%, we got too much of a good thing, and now all of a sudden we don't get in the K, we don't get in the calcium, and our soil starts to get tighter. And guys, just in the last 2 weeks, I've looked at soil tests that had base saturation rates of magnesium of over 30%. Some of them as high as 32%. That is coming at the expense of K and calcium, and we want to make sure that we're addressing that and fixing that. Neil goes on to say, 150 bushel corn crop takes roughly 28 pounds of calcium and 28 pounds of magnesium. Guys, it's important to know, we've pushed the NPK, the NPK, the NPK, and that's great, and we need those, but we need these other nutrients also. And knowing how much of different ones it takes to get the crop that we need is critical, and we have to get that calcium into that plant, and we have to get that magnesium into that plant. And I thought this was interesting. As the nitrate nitrogen moves through the soil, much of it converts to nitric acid, which then leaches available soil calcium. And that is why the overuse of nitrogen reduces calcium, and especially when the soils have not been balanced to the proper saturations of the nutrients and maintained in that particular soil. So what happens is if we use too much in and we already have too much mag, we're just making our problem bigger. We exacerbate that problem and make it so that we're really hurting for the magnesium to get into the plant. However, an excess of magnesium as well as nitrogen in the soil initiates a process which prevents the crop from growing dry and nutritionally ripe. And guys, that's one of our major goals, to get that crop actually physiologically mature, to get it nutritionally ripe. And if we have too much magnesium and or too much nitrogen, then we prevent that crop from drying down the way we want it to. And how many of us have used too much nitrogen in the past? Are we looking at that 0.6 to 0.7 saying, how are we going to reduce our N? Or are we getting on too much? Clay soils that are high in magnesium and low in calcium cement together tightly and are subject to compaction and clotting. They crust over easy, which prevent the in-soaking of water and the recovery of capillary water during the dry seasons of the year. Too much magnesium makes that soil tight and keeps that water from percolating up and down. We want it to go up when it's dry. We want it to go down when there's too much of it. We want to make sure that we're doing the right things on that. One of the things that he talks about here is looking at everything together in one deal. And he says when the soil test showed certain fertilizers they could cut back on to save money, they spent it on micronutrients and secondaries. Yet micronutrients only make a difference when everything else has been corrected. So it's really important that we not rely just on those macros or just on the micros, but that everything matters, guys. We have to get everything put together in the right way in order to be effective. Moving on over here, in regards to talking about magnesium, Neil writes, high magnesium and low calcium permit organic residue to decay into alcohol, which is a sterilant to bacteria. I'm going to read that again louder for the people in the back. High mag and low calcium permits organic residue to decay into alcohol, which is a sterilant to bacteria. In other words, we are hurting our soil health. You guys know that I believe that one of the things we're going to figure out is that if we continue to do the right things with macros, secondaries, and micros, and we fix those, that we're going to see soil microbiology improve, that we're going to see soil microbiology flourish. And obviously, if we don't have enough calcium and we have too much magnesium, now all of a sudden residue becomes an alcohol and it kills the bacteria in the soil. We do not want that to happen. We're trying to figure out how to do everything under the sun, from cover crops to anything else that we can think of, in an attempt to get that soil alive and doing well. And one of the things we can do to get that is have proper calcium. Again, he writes in here, magnesium deficiency causes strips along the veins, and oftentimes there will be a purplish color on the lower side of the leaf. Too much magnesium in the soil prevents the plant from getting enough. And so I just want to keep talking about that we just over and over and over want to try and get to that target of 65 to 75% calcium and 10 to 20% magnesium. Anytime that we don't have that, we're going to be having some problems. It's going to hurt us. The first order of business is to see whether magnesium is above 10 and below 15. If we have 68% calcium and 12% magnesium, plenty of phosphorus, adequate potassium along with sulfur and trace elements, it only takes 1 pound of nitrogen to produce a corn on such fertile soil. And I would suggest, guys, that properly managed, it takes less than that, more like 0.7. His point is this: if that magnesium base saturation gets higher, it takes more nitrogen to produce a bushel of corn. And he talks about the fact that if it gets above 20, that you can be needing up to 1.5 pounds of nitrogen to grow that bushel of corn. Guys, this is important. There's a relationship here between mag and the nitrogen, and we want to make sure that we're doing the right things. In order to reduce our nitrogen, we have to get these other things correct. Calcium and magnesium are considered as elements of secondary importance in the industry and the market of commercial fertilizers. But the truth is that for the soil and for the plants, calcium and magnesium are primary in importance, both quantitatively and for their biochemical significance. Guys, these two nutrients are going to help your soil flourish. You guys know that I've talked about bugs in a jug, and there's a place for it and a time for it, and it's going to get better. But I firmly believe having all of the nutrients in the soil correct is going to make those better. I believe that a lot of the bugs that we're applying into a soil with a pH of 5.8 are dying very quickly once they get there. And I want to make sure that we do the basics, we do the foundation, guys, before we try to build above it. A deeper look into every living body, including the human being, discovers the fact that nothing can live without calcium or magnesium. It has been proven that calcium is the most important element among all the plant food elements. And remember that calcium can be damaged or be reduced simply because we don't have the right amount of magnesium. Too much mag equals not enough calcium. What are the functions of magnesium? Some of those functions would include, it's the mineral constituent of chlorophyll. It is central to the chlorophyll molecule. If we don't have that magnesium in there, we're hurting. It's actively involved in photosynthesis. It aids in phosphate metabolization. And when we start trying to get that phosphate to metabolize, it's important to have the right amount of mag. And one of my early mentors in this business said that he believed that magnesium, I just want you to pretend that on your house you can turn all your lights on in one place. And every one of those switches, and say there's 20 all in a row, a bank of 20 switches. Magnesium, and instead of those being lights, now I want you to talk about them being enzyme systems in the plant. You got 20 systems in the plant. Magnesium is the person who comes through and starts flipping the switches on. Bang, 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 bang. And when we have the right amount of magnesium, we activate those systems, and we are off and running to getting those enzyme systems to do what we want and to get ourselves set up for maximum yield potential. If there's a cache of sodium, nitrogen may take sodium. Otherwise, it takes calcium. Nitrogen never, ever takes magnesium. But as nitrogen leaches downward, the passenger status of calcium is assured. So if you use too much in and it leaches out, you're taking calcium with it. Removal of 10% calcium by a nitrogen oversupply will increase the magnesium level by 10%. This is one reason that nitrogen from anhydrous ammonia has the reputation for tightening soils. Guys, as we look at this, too much in takes out calcium. When calcium leaves, the base saturation rate of magnesium goes up and the soil starts to get tight and other nutrients become less available. And so we're wanting to avoid that. We want to make sure we're not exacerbating that, so that nitrogen component being correct is the right way to do it. Use of ammonium sulfate when the calcium saturation is above 60% means that you're taking out magnesium at the same time and helps to better control any excesses. Point being, we need to have that calcium saturation rate up to 60%. So if we don't have that, we've got to go get some high cal lime and get it on there so we can get that calcium base saturation rate up where we want it and start getting that magnesium to remove out if we have too much. And I'm not here saying anything you guys know. I do not believe in a one nutrient deal. I don't think it's more mag or less mag. I think it's the right amount of mag. We're looking for that base saturation rate, like I said, somewhere between 12 and 18 in an ideal world. And lastly, working out of hands-on agronomy, he's talking about the fact that whenever magnesium gets higher and higher, the soil gets tighter and tighter, and potassium availability gets lower and lower. Two reasons. When the soil collapses, when that accordion comes down, and we have too much mag, will lead to too dry. Too much mag makes it tight. We just in and of itself can't get the potassium extracted. Also, when we have too much magnesium, magnesium is competing with potassium for a place to go into the plant, and too much mag overwhelms the K and keeps the K from going in. In the presence of ammonium nitrogen, there will be a problem with microbial fixation and attachment to the soil colloid. The higher the nitrogen, the more potassium it will take to do the same job. Why? Because too much nitrogen makes calcium, takes it out, makes it less available, and all of a sudden we're back to fighting mag that's too high. And going into life and energy on page 43, he talks about a lot of the different deficiencies in here. But magnesium deficiency would be the stripes along the veins and often a purplish color on the underside of the lower leaves. This symptom, loosely speaking, is a magnesium deficiency. Technically, what there is here is a nitrogen toxicity. Isn't that interesting? We call it a magnesium deficiency, and actually what we've done is we have a toxic amount of nitrogen. No, it's funny, because a lot of people will talk about the fact, don't use boron, don't use copper, they're toxic. How many people you've ever talked to, how many agronomists, how many consultants have come to you and said, hey, let's make sure we don't get a nitrogen toxicity? And that just doesn't happen. More, right? Not true. What we're talking about here is technically it is a nitrogen toxicity. And magnesium is the antidote for pulling the nitrogen out by forming magnesium nitrate that is then flushed out of the plant, making the symptoms disappear. Symptoms may disappear after this single nutrient fix, yet the cause behind them remains. Guys, overusing nitrogen hurts us in so many ways. And I know that we get scared, and I don't ask you to go out and go whole hog and reduce your nitrogen rates, but I'm going to encourage you to do some studies on your farm every year. Yeah, today we're talking about magnesium, and so why am I talking about nitrogen? Because they're so closely related. Because the fact of the matter is, too much nitrogen hurts us in so many ways. It hurts us in plant health. It hurts us in magnesium availability. It actually becomes toxic to the plant to some degree. We can hide that. If we use too much nitrogen, we can put on some magnesium and kind of hide that toxicity that we created. However, I don't think hiding symptoms is what we're all about. We're after cures. One of the questions I have about modern medicine is really how much money is in the cure and how much money is in hiding the symptoms. In the field, it's the same way. There's more money in hiding symptoms than there is in curing it. If we cure it, we no longer have to buy the things we need to hide the symptoms. So let's just cure it. Let's go after it and say, how are we going to fix this? How are we going to fix it once and for all? So guys, as we look at the magnesium, we know that number one, it can give us a fake pH reading. That if we have high mag levels, that we could put on a lot of calcium and maybe drive some of that mag off. We know if our base saturation rate is above 60% on calcium, that ammonium sulfate is our friend. I would encourage you, gypsum could be your friend if it's pure gypsum that's being mined. We know that not having enough mag in relationship to the potassium is going to cut our yields significantly and drastically. I have multiple people that we have worked with who've had significant yield response to applying a single pint of chelated magnesium. You say, how do they do that? Some of them have put it in the trench. Some of them have put it in the wings through a Y drop. Some of them have said, hey, we can't fit that all in the row. We're going to make a pass and we're going to spray it on in a foliar feed at about V3. Whatever it is, the quicker the better. Guys, the best time to kill a weed is before it germinates or shortly thereafter. The best time to fix a nutrient deficiency is before the plant germinates or just as quickly as we can right afterwards. And that's what we're talking about here in doing this. We really do hope you're finding value in what we do. And guys, we really enjoy doing these. We'll be coming back at you with some more of the 12 Days of Nutrients very soon. And I hope this finds this season for you guys going great. and that you're getting ready. Oh, one extra thing. We're getting really close to Christmas here. I just want to encourage you. I'm not here to preach to you, but man, Christmas Eve service is fantastic. Find one, go there, and just enjoy the season. Enjoy the feeling of the peace that can come from all of that, because we really do hope you guys are having a tremendously blessed Christmas season.